All black everything. Welcome. All black everything. We back. We going in, y'all. Welcome. Thank you for checking out the channel. All black everything. Like, subscribe, share, subscribe, like, whatever order you like. Thumbs up. Today we going in on the king, the scholar, teacher, master teacher, John Henrik Clarke. Gonna learn about the king. Huh? Better understand it. Do some digging. Do some research of your own. Don't believe nothing I say. Please don't take nothing from my word. I'm just sharing, laying information. You know, enlightening, sparking. Remember? Check out the custom mades. It's yours. Thinkersplight.com. Thinkersplight79.com. Thinkersplight. Thinkersplight79@gmail.com. Check it out. Got your good custom made shirts all day long. Here we go though. We're gonna check it out. All black everything, digging. Master teacher, John Henrik Clarke. He says, until Africans throughout the world begin to tell their own story, the story will not be properly told. John Henrik Clarke, African World Revolution. Master Teacher is a story about an African properly told by an African. It is also a story about all Africans, particularly overseas Africans in exile, in search of their true identity and their cultural roots from which they have been dispossessed by the stories of other peoples. To have known and worked with John Henrik Clarke for almost 30 years, it is to have witnessed the fruition of the search that all Africans in the United States have consciously and or unconsciously engaged in since the Americanization of the African. It is the fruition that now in Dr. Clarke's declining years is manifested in the man at peace with himself and with the world. For he has found the answers to the questions that trouble the troubled mind of a young cotton picker, son of a sharecropper in anti-black apartheid Alabama and Georgia. John Henry Clarke searches for the true self that Barbara Eleanor Adams artfully portrays in one that is unique to Africans brutally severed from their land and culture by the European slave trade. Its uniqueness derives as much and perhaps more from the psychological violence visited on those Africans who survived the Middle Passage to find themselves stripped of all physical and spiritual sustaining points of reference. The chattel slave environment in the United States was purposefully designed to reduce the African to a non-human piece of property. The past slavery Americanization process, however well-meaning some may have intended, all still perceive it to have been in effect, was and is but a means for legitimizing the cultural disposition of a people. Master Teacher is a story of one of Africans' triumphs, victory over all the historical forces set in motion to dehumanize a people. In that regard, it is a story of the struggle between the two souls that W.E.B. Du Bois speaks of in his characterization of the Black man's search for identity in America. The message to overseas Africans of John Henrik Clarke's life and achievements as a world-renowned scholar and teacher is that only when Africans return to their own cultural roots will their true liberation be achieved. It is only then that Africa and Africans wherever they are, will regain their rightful place in history of the world. To have known and to have worked with John Henrik Clarke has been an inspiration. The joy of reading Master Teacher is to have recaptured the memories of a long personal and professional association with one of our intellectual heroes, and is to know that the book was written by a former student and mentee, Barbara E. Adams. Tilden J. Lamel, President, University of the District of Columbia, February 1992. So we're gonna get into it. That was just a nice little intro about the young king, the god, the ancestors, the elder ancestor. Rise in paradise as usual. Kings, queens. Here we go. The introduction. John Henry Clarke was born in Union Springs, Alabama on January 1st, 1915 to poor sharecropper parents. He grew up in Columbus, Georgia, and came to New York in 1933 as a young man with the ambition of pursuing a career as a writer. From his early years, Dr. Clarke studied the history of the world, placing emphasis on the history of African people. He continued his studies by enrolling at New York University to major in history and world literature. Dr. Clarke knew at an early age that he wanted to become an innovative classroom teacher. He told his father, who tried to understand, even though he had hoped his son would become a successful farmer with land of his own, Dr. Clarke's teachings career started in the streets of New York City, where he used Harlem as his classroom, teaching from the step ladder. He attained the kind of success that would have made his father very proud. As a writer of fiction, Dr. Clarke has published more than 50 short stories in this country and abroad. As a historian, he has edited over 20 books, published 4 books in 1991 alone. Dr. Clarke is Professor Emeritus of African History in the Department of Black and Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College of the City University of New York, where he retired after 20 years of teaching. I met Dr. Clarke for the first time in 1970 when I enrolled in African American history course that Hunter College offered 2 evenings a week in Harlem. Dr. Clarke taught his class in the old Hotel Teresa, located on 125th and Adams, Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard, then known as 7th Avenue. His class was scheduled for this site because Dr. Clarke insisted on teaching at this location. He felt that if he was going to teach the history of African people, that it should be taught in Harlem. The Hotel Teresa, with its rich neighborhood surroundings, was the perfect place. It would be the last semester his class was offered in Harlem. It was scheduled for the Park Avenue campus. It was rescheduled for the Park Avenue campus, where Dr. Clarke taught until his retirement from the classroom. After the first class, I took every class Dr. Clarke taught for the next 5 semesters. Each class was a new experience. I hung on to every word and was challenged to produce my best work each time. I earned an A for each class, but the grade did not come easy. Tests were lengthy, and the take-home finals were worse, consisting of 10 essay questions for which he expected 10 full-page answers intelligently written. While many of my classmates complained, I was completely motivated and relieved to learn that I could not only receive a decent grade for a test and term papers, but that I could still focus intellectually while raising my 3 young children. I would sit in class mesmerized by his every word, eager to hear the scheduled weekly lecture about my ancestors. And as I listened, I often wondered why someone had not yet written a book on this great historian. It was several years later that, with the undergraduate experience behind me, that I suggested to Dr. Clarke that a book should be written about him. He agreed, and while I sat amazed by his honesty, somehow found the nerve to suggest myself as his biographer. I cannot forget the positive feedback from the two people with whom I shared the initial news. The first good reaction was from Dr. Tilden J. Mel, or Mele, however you pronounce it. Then the chairman of the Department of Black and Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College. He was genuinely excited about the possibility of the book and offered his assistance. His reassurance gave me the confidence I desperately needed at the time. But the best guidance that I would receive on the project came from my friend Jaffer Kasamali, who was at Hunter College then and is still at the acting director of the African Studies sequence in the Department of Black and Puerto Rican Studies. Excuse me. It was at his suggestion that I immediately began to read and examine many biographies and autobiographies for their layout, style, organization, and design. His advice was priceless, and I read as many books as I could get my hands on over the years while I wrote. Among the numerous books that I found most influential, Maggie's American Dream by Dr. James P. Comer, and Miles, the autobiography by Miles Davis and Quincy Troop. As I reminisce, I could say that yes, I was intimidated by the entire idea, but with Dr. Clarke's gentle manner and direction, I learned to relax while I interviewed him. I I remember the first taping very vividly. We started on June 25th, 1980, in his home in Harlem on Driver's Row, and it was 90 degrees. We proceeded in spite of the heat, and Dr. Clarke was chatty and somewhat enthusiastic as we proceeded to tape the important facts of his life. In the beginning, he would suggest where to begin, and he would often start with his childhood or some other relevant story experience that would invariably end up with Harlem in the 1930s. I am convinced that his favorite period was during the 1930s because it represented new awakenings, beginnings, and his arrival in New York. Because he is a consummate professional, it carried over into our interviews. However, relying on my daily outline or agenda kept him focused on the topic that day. His ability to recall incidents that occurred 59 or even 73 years ago astounds me. He tapped into my deepest emotions when he spoke of his parents' collective efforts to feed the family on limited funds, and of his mother's conscientious effort to put aside a few cents for his education in spite of their ever-present poverty. Countless hours of interviews were recorded concurrently with Dr. Clarke's busy lecture and worldwide travel schedule, and it was necessary to read and repeat these readings several times in order to tailor the chapters to his liking. However, the early years would not have been possible without his consent. His complete cooperation and inexhaustible patience, as evidenced by the following letter. I am most appreciative and grateful to have been given this opportunity since several educators and professional writers have recently approached Dr. Clarke for his story, and there are rumors of several independent projects in progress. I was overjoyed that this past February, when after reading the completed manuscript to Dr. Clarke, he turned to me and said that I had done a good job and that he was pleased with what I had wrote. I followed his facial expressions throughout the readings, and he listened carefully and very intently to every word in detail. He remained composed and serene as I read. So by watching him closely, I already knew before he spoke that he was satisfied. His final comment was my greatest reward. Barbara Eleanor Adams, Harlem, New York, February 1922. And we're going to get into it. It's not over yet. We just getting started. All Black Everything. Check it out. Dr. Henrik Clarke, Master Teacher. Do some research on them. Do your own research on them. This is one of the greatest. One of the greatest scholars we got. Hmm? Huh? Think about it. Let's go. It says his first recollections. This is Dr. Clarke speaking. When I was about 3, close to it or in the neighborhood, my first recollections were of the many concerned faces of uncles and grandmas who gathered around me because I fell off something. It was then that I discovered for the first time how much my family cared for children. In this memory of so many faces, one of my uncles took me to a well and put some water on my head. My father kept saying, send the boy to me, send the boy to me. In a very serious tone, my father said this to my Uncle Henry, part of whose name I had, which I later changed to Henrik after I got to New York and was giving myself a college education. I became an admirer of the Scandinavian rebel playwright Henrik Ibsen, who was the first playwright who dared to mention something like the word syphilis on stage and wrote A Doll's House, the first play about a woman's revolt against the treatment by her husband. In other words, he took up the social issues, and because I admired him, I changed the spelling of my name to the way he spelled his. I later realized that my name from Henry to Henrik, and later legalized my name from Henrik to Henrik and added an E to the Clarke before I entered the Army. When I was growing up, I was affectionately called Bubba by my immediate family, and I'm still known by that name to them. We got a few Bubbas in the family too. What up, Bubbas? Oh, y'all. Love y'all. There we go. We were sharecroppers, and I wasn't conscious of the true poverty of a sharecropper family then, and wouldn't be conscious of it until later, after the death of my mother, when my family was sent back to the farm where we were to remain about 1 year before my father chose a second wife. Then the full impact of the difficult life of a sharecropper family hit me, because we were literally driven off of our property and forced to go live with an aunt through marriage, who was married to my great aunt's brother. The desire to make a better life on the farm was the key factor as to why a lot of people left their farms in the Union Springs, Alabama, to go up the hill. To go up next to the Mill City, which was just across the Alabama state line, the city of Columbus, Georgia. They did this with the hope of making enough money to eventually buy land rather than sharecrop the land. My father thought he would make enough there for a better life and ultimately come back to own some land so that he would become an independent farmer. It was basically a sharecropping community in which none of the blacks of consequence owned any land. My father would ultimately die without realizing his dream. The only land he would own at the time of his death was the land in which he was buried, which was purchased with a 10-cent insurance policy. I remember that our damaged roof was another reason we had to move in with a branch of the family, excuse me. I remember the preparation to leave Alabama to go to the city. We would move into a house on the land owned by Ludi and Uncle Miller. Uncle Miller had married a mulatto named Ludi, or Ludi, however you say it, whose father had died and left her land. She was light enough to pass for white and was always threatening to disown us and go back to the white race. I kind of hoped she would, but didn't know what we would do if she did, because she was the only member of the family who had land. I mean, a lot of land. And we were on her land now, being driven off of ours. She had a 7th grade education and later became the county superintendent of schools for the colored. I think she married my uncle after some disappointment from another man. In the cast characters that I remember at the time would be my great grandmother. We called her my Mary, she was my father's grandmother. My aunt Lisa, the midwife, and her brother. I remember the community in which I grew up in as being highly cultured, in spite of the fact that very few people read books other than the Bible. This poor community was highly cultured because they loved and pampered me and cared for people. In caring for me, my family made compensations for my weaknesses. For example, although I grew up in a farm family, I was a lousy farmer. So they let me keep records. I kept the records and the numbers of bales of cotton that was sold and listings of what things cost. In this dilemma in my early life, because I was so inadequate in many things, I became the community reader and read the Bible to old ladies, threaded their needles, and was kind of the community consultant. Because I was such a poor fighter in gang fights, I became a strategist. They let me do something with my mind, and I was very poor when I was very poor in doing something with my hands. And because I couldn't play basketball very well, they made me the referee. See, I grew up in the community that because they cared so much about me, they found a way to help me find my strength and compensate for my weaknesses. I didn't have to apologize for being weak. They would say, "Little Bubba, think about something," or "Give Bubba a book." The boy got a head on his shoulders, and maybe one day he would lead us all out of this stuff. I used my mind to plan a strategy for dodging the Ku Klux Klan. I strategized the system because we had no guns. The strategy was to always place an Uncle Tom as a plant in the home of the Grand Wizard, who could listen in on the meetings and serve the food. hmm hmm They always served food at the meetings because the Klan saw the servant as a Tom. They didn't think he had enough intelligence to understand what was being said. So in actuality, he was serving food and attending the KKK meeting all at the same time. And each time the Klan planned to get somebody in the community, the news got back to the community ahead of their raid, and the person always got away. There was one exception when our Tom went to Georgia to bury a relative and didn't let us know that he had missed attending the last meeting of the Klan. That was the first time they got their man. During these first Moulton Street years, my father was working in the brickyard tending kilns. What I remember most about these years was the feeling of complete totality within the black community because everyone looked after each other. And with the memory of so many uncles, I later discovered that some of these uncles were not really relatives at all. And these were the ones who were most special to me. Now, the structure of our community existed and developed around Macedonia's Baptist Church. Macedonia Baptist Church. At the end of the street lived Reverend Chapman. We also lived at the end of the street near him and two doors away from Deacon Johnson, with Miss Pearl Brown, Reverend Chapman's sister, on the other side. Miss Pearl was the lady who started the rumor that I was such a little gentleman because I was tipping my hat. Now I had to concentrate on becoming a little gentleman to become to keep from being to keep from disappointing Miss Pearl, which was quite a strain on me. When I think about it, I wish she had kept her mouth shut. I remember the time when two of my mother's brothers visited and each gave me a nickel. For some reason, I put one in my piggy bank, to which they said, "Ah, the boy's thrifty. He's going to save." Thereafter, each time they gave me a visit and both would give me a nickel, I always saved one. This habit seemed to start a prophecy about thriftiness. Look what people do sometimes, not what is prophesied for one to do. I had no sense of being thrifty. All I knew is that I had two nickels and I didn't want to spend one. So I put the other one in the piggy bank. So now I have the reputation of being thrifty and I have to live up to things. I have to live up to this image I hadn't even given thought to. Throughout most of my life, but especially my early life, I was fulfilling people's prophecies. He was doing it from the job. I remember some startling things happening when I lived on Moulton Street, which made a strong impression on me as a youth. A lady decided that she was going to preach, and so she put a lamp on her porch and started conducting service. It was unheard of for the lady to preach in those days. Another thing I found fascinating were the tents that housed the medicine shows. They were found in the open lot in an area near Glade Road, excuse me, now called Casetta Road. It was also during my youth that a kind of dandy came to town who wore good clothes, had a steamer, which was the Cadillac of the day, and carried $1,000 bill in his pocket. We called him the thousandaire. He never spent the money because, of course, he didn't want to break his $1,000 bill. He conned everyone. He conned everyone, especially the most of the ladies. One day he miscalculated a turn in the road and went into a ditch, whereupon white folks came to claim the car, which was their car anyway. They also took his clothes and everything, which he borrowed from them while they were in Europe. He had, that interval, given the townspeople a sense of grandeur in all his lives of travel and adventure. Excuse me. I remember too the minstrel people singing the old West Indian blues with songs probably composed by Spencer Williams. These songs were sung as a tribute to sticky to the sticky to itiveness of Caribbean people. I had no consciousness of what a West Indian was or was supposed to be. I really had no knowledge of Caribbean people at all until coming to New York City, and it wasn't until my arrival there that I immediately became active with the people from the different islands by visiting their respective social clubs. It was at the time when Marcus Garvey was obviously in New York because I heard the Marcus Garvey blues for the first time. Woo, another king, meeting the kings, all black everything, master teacher. We coming back to it. Like, share, subscribe. Let's get in it. Go deeper. Thumbs up, baby. Black everything. Power. Let's go. All black everything. Peace and love.